So what we're talking about today is the 6 categories of sprouts and also how we're going to grow them, because these are absolutely fundamental to the Hippocrates programme, and what we all need to be doing is getting more chlorophyll into our systems. So kicking straight off with the first category of sprouts, that is our tray greens. Now these are the larger seeds that are grown in soil. First off we have wheatgrass. And we're going to be planting some of this as well, but this is what it looks like when it's fully grown. This is about 10 days old, and it's a decent sized seed. I personally use spelt grain when I'm growing wheatgrass, but any old hard winter wheat would also be fine. So I particularly like spelt grain because spelt is an ancient grain. It's a very, very strong plant, and it contains more protein than most of the modern day hybridized wheats. So when you harvest this, you literally just cut it off at soil level. Now, for those of you that are quite close up, what you'll probably see is that it's almost got like a little white part down at the base. Can you see that? The white part is particularly important because it contains a very important phytochemical, otherwise known as a plant chemical, that is called rutin. And rutin is really important for the immune system. So if we cut our wheatgrass as close as possible to the soil, we'll get more rutin, and that's very valuable for health. So wheatgrass, we're going to run through exactly how to grow that in just a second. The next large tray green we have is the pea shoot. Now these are just common or garden peas. We've got peas here, just the dry peas. You can get these in any health store. You'll find them just in bags, and what you would do with those is you would soak and sprout them first, but let's just run through the categories before we do that. So thirdly, we've got sunflowers. Now sunflower greens are fantastic because they are a complete source of protein. We often are hearing from people who are meat eaters and standard British diet people. They will say, where do you get your protein? And what we're talking about really is amino acids. So these sunflower greens contain a complete spectrum of amino acids, as do wheatgrass seeds as well. So if we eat the sunflower greens and drink the wheatgrass, then we will definitely get a complete spectrum of amino acids on a daily basis, which is of course important for our health. So, thinking about the large tray greens, we're just going to move on to the smaller green things. The large tray greens, we have to think about these as protein, energy and chlorophyll. So they're very high in chlorophyll. They're the highest quality of chlorophyll that we will find in the sprouted foods. But just moving on, we've now got the small green sprouts, these ones, so that's category 2. These are the smaller seeds such as broccoli, alfalfa, radish, and anything that's a sort of small seed. Onion, garlic, for example, these will all grow into little green leaved sprouts. So obviously, as you can see here, the green of the sprout is actually quite a lot smaller than the green of this. This is a great big thing, and here the leaves are much smaller. So there is still chlorophyll in these things, but it's a lower amount of chlorophyll. But what you will get from this is vitamins and trace minerals, which of course are really important for our health. So that's category 2. Now these guys, you can grow them in an automatic sprouter, or you can grow them in a jar, and we'll come on to that in just a second. So category 3, we have the grain sprouts. So wheatgrass, obviously, we've just spoken about, but this is the wheatgrass. This is sprouted and ready to plant, which we'll do in just a second. Other grain sprouts that you might think about would be the small alkaline grains. So, for example, quinoa, amaranth, and a grain called teff. Now, all of those have a very small tail, and they're incredibly good for energy. So any athletes would benefit greatly from using the small grain sprouts. Here are some buckwheat sprouts, which are, again, very, very good for sustained energy. So it's a low glycemic index. We've probably heard about carbohydrate being either high glycemic, in other words, the sugar gets into the system very quickly, or lower glycemic, where the sugar is more slowly absorbed and stabilizes the blood sugar rather than making it spike. The buckwheat is very definitely a slow release energy source, so it's very good for people that are doing a lot of activity. So then coming on to category 4, these are the pulses. So we all know about these lentils, chickpeas, for example. We've got some chickpeas here. These all sprout very nicely, and by sprouting them, rather than just soaking them and then boiling them, you'll retain much more of the nutritional value. So that's really important. So category 5 is a little bit strange because that only contains 2 types, mung and aduki beans. These are the mungs. They're very commonly eaten in salads with people that are eating living foods. And the adukis, these are the reddish brown ones. So these taste very similar to each other, and they're particularly good for trace minerals and energy again. They're quite a high calorie sprout. So anybody that's looking to maintain body weight, if they have a tendency to lose weight easily, would be well advised to get some of these guys on board when they're sprouted. And then finally, we've got fenugreek, which is in a category of its own. It's a spicy sprout, and it's very good for detoxification. It's great for warmth, because one of the things that we're often told on the living foods diet, or often asked on the living foods diet, is, don't you feel cold in the winter? Most of that, I have to say, is psychological, but if you want something spicy that feels warming, then fenugreek is very good. Very cleansing, detoxifying sprout, and it also has the ability to reduce any body odour that people might suffer from. It's also good at stabilising blood sugar. So many people have blood sugar regulation issues. You know these people because they tend to crash in the afternoon and then they need a cup of coffee to get them going again. These help to stabilise the blood sugar, as do the larger tray greens. So the next part that we want to think about is just thinking about growing and planting some category 1s, so the big ones that go into soil. So the absolute first thing that we need to think about is how are we going to sprout these things in the first place. So let's go right back to stage 1. All we're going to need is a sprouting jar or a sprouting bag. These are fantastic when you're travelling. If anybody travels, then you don't want to be carting around large numbers of sprouting jars, because what's going to happen in your luggage? It's going to smash. And if you're flying with EasyJet or whoever, then they're going to give you a luggage allowance, which is not very big. And these are quite heavy. So if you just take a little bag with you, which you can buy these on the internet, you'll find that they're really, really great for when you're going travelling. So what you would do is get some wheat grain. I'm talking about wheat here, but we're also going to talk about sunflowers as well. And you would fill up your jar to no more than half, because as soon as we start soaking these things, they expand. So you'll get a lot of expansion. You're probably going to get this everywhere. But let's get some of this into the sprouting jar, and all over the floor by the look of it as well, so that's good. Yeah, nice. We'll just go a third of the way, because I think otherwise we're going to be having a few problems. And then literally all you would do with this is you would just put the lid on. As you can see, the lid has holes in it. It's just a mesh screen. So you pop that in, and then filtered tap water is fine, or distilled water, or whichever type of water you have at home, and you would just literally pour a load of water onto this until it's completely full. I haven't filled it as much as I normally would, that's only about a quarter full, but with wheatgrass, wheat grain, you can fill it to half. The reason I'm not doing that is because I seem to be getting more on the floor than I do in the jar, so we're going to have a sweep up later. So soak and sprout, and this sprouts just overnight. So if you want to be able to plant your wheatgrass, you need to give yourself about 2 days. The first day is overnight soaking. The next day, what you will do is you will rinse. So what you'll end up with is something a bit like this. So you pour all the water off, which is easy because you've got your mesh screen. So you'd pour the soap water off. It will be a funny colour, don't worry about that. And then rinse and rinse and rinse until the run water runs clear. What you'll then need is, if you're using a little jar like this, you'll notice that it's got this on it. That allows you to put the jar at an angle. Now what I do, You need it at an angle so it can ventilate, because what you don't want is you don't want a load of stuff that's just kind of stagnating. You want air to be able to circulate, and you also want it to be able to drain so that it's not going to rot. So after you've poured off your soak water and rinsed thoroughly, you then want it at a sort of 45-degree angle. And you can do this on the kitchen worktop. It works very well. You can get little stands that support these jars, but you can also just do it on your cutlery rack. So it's very easy. You just turn it to a 45-degree angle, and it just sits there, and you rinse it twice a day. So after you've run the soap water off and rinsed thoroughly and drained, you'd then come back the same evening, and you'd rinse it again, and you'd drain it, and then it would need one more night. And one more night later, it looks like this, and it has a little tail on it, and you'll see its little tail. That means it's ready to go into the soil. So the sunflower greens are very similar, and I want to just run through the difference, because sunflower seeds, the brown ones, the grey ones rather, these are the sort of ones that you would eat. You're all familiar with sunflower seeds that look like this. These are the ones that you would soak and then eat. If you try to grow sunflower greens out of this, you will get a mouldy mess and it will not work. You need the ones that still have their hulls on. Okay, so you want the one that looks like birdseed. So make sure that you differentiate. So when anyone's talking about sunflower greens grown from sunflower seed, make absolutely certain that it's this seed that you're trying to grow it with, because I've been in all sorts of trouble trying to grow it out of this before I realised that it's only these seeds that actually work. So if you're on a massive budget, then you can buy organic seeds that from an organic supplier. If you're on a very limited budget, you can actually just go to your local pet store even probably and buy birdseed, which is about 50p a bag, as opposed to £17 for a large bag of the organic stuff. It will do almost the same job. So don't be inhibited by cost. Just do the best you can under the circumstances. It's far better to just grow it from cheap birdseed that you might find in a fruit and veg shop than to not grow it at all. Okay? So you're happy with the difference between what is going to grow as a sunflower green and what is not going to grow. And as you can see, when you look at the sunflower greens, you've actually got, in those that haven't completely shed their black bits, you've still got these little black husks. Now, you know when your sunflowers are ready, because 90% of these little black shells would have fallen off. So people often ask me, at what time is a sunflower green ready? Two ways to find out whether that's the case. When nearly all of the little black husks have been lost, then they're ready to cut and juice. Or alternatively, what you can do is you can just pick one and look very closely at the inside, and I'm going to pass this one around. What you'll see is you'll get your two main leaves, and then right on the inside you get another little shoot just starting to come through. That is ready. So I'm just going to pass that one around so that you get the feel of when they're going to be ready to harvest. And then finally the peas. I've got some peas here. You would, with peas, because they are a big seed, as you can see they're large. Now these guys swell up massively. So if you try and half fill a sprouting jar with these, they're not going to sprout properly because they take on so much water that you actually need more space in your sprouting jar. So for your peas in the sprouting jar, only ever 1/3 full of peas and 2/3 water, because otherwise they're just going to not sprout properly. You won't get enough of the soak water in there. And with these, I soak them, rather than overnight, I actually soak them for 24 hours. So that's the only difference. Sunflower and wheatgrass are soaked just overnight. The peas I soak for 24 hours. And then again, rinsing thoroughly and leaving on the countertop until you just get a little tail. So these are the sprouted sunflowers, going back to the sunflowers. As soon as they start to get a little tail, and I'll hand this one around as well, that means they're ready. They've almost gone. They got a bit over enthusiastic in my car yesterday on the way here, so they're almost a little bit over. But you can see that the black husk has split, and they are then ready to plant as soon as the first little tail starts to appear. So whilst you're having a look at that, what I'd like to do is just actually plant some wheatgrass so you can see how it's all done. Now, if you want to handle soil, that's absolutely fine. I tend to just put a bit of a barrier on, put some disposable gloves on. Now, when I say that we grow wheatgrass in soil and the tray greens in soil, I'm not talking about planting them as in putting little finger holes in and then dropping a little seed into a finger hole. It's much, much, much more simple than that, and it's an absolute no-brainer, and it's so quick and easy. So literally all you would do, give it a shake just to make sure that all the different little bits of the wheat seed have separated from each other, otherwise they tend to clump. So once it's all sprouted, give it a little shake, and then what you'll do is you'll pop it directly into the soil. So you've got your soil trays here, I've got my soil trays. This is just normal garden compost. You don't need anything fancy. Over at Hippocrates they'll say you need peat moss, 15% peat moss. I like the idea of conserving our peat bogs. I'm not into decimating the Irish peat bogs, so what I would tend to do is just use a standard garden compost, either one that comes straight out of my compost bin, or you can even use any old soil, or just even a grow bag, whatever you fancy, just as long as you've got the tray approximately half full of the soil that you're going to be using. So we just dump it all on there, and then you spread it out. Just spread it out with your hand, and what you're trying to achieve with the wheatgrass is getting it so that you can't really see any soil. So you want it thick enough. It takes a little bit of practice, depending on, a little bit of trial and error, depending on how used you are to doing this and how big your seed trays are. But a standard large sprouting jar will give you enough wheatgrass. If you fill it half full, it will give you enough wheat seed to fill one of these size trays. But if you've got smaller trays, then obviously you'll just need to experiment accordingly. So just spread it all out over there so that you can't really see any soil. So that's what that will look like. And then the surprising part now is that you do not actually need to put any soil on top. All you would do is you would now just water it with the watering can that I don't have. You'd water it, good thorough soaking. You want it so the tray actually drips through. Now with these, you can probably see that I've got a little plastic tray underneath which doesn't have any holes in. So the reason for that is that I didn't want to get water and stuff and soil all over the table. But you can grow them in this. But what you want to do is make sure the tray drips first. And then if you want to just keep it on the side of your kitchen, for example, you don't want soil anywhere, you can buy these trays from Akenbury Sprouts, and I can give you the website for that afterwards. So the sprouting trays and the underneath bits you can get online. So that can just, once you've sat that on your kitchen worktop, because a lot of people might not have a garden, they might not have a sprouting rack. This stuff doesn't grow if you're in the middle of a British winter. So you need to do it inside, and I grow this stuff all year round, but what I do in the winter when it gets cold or if there's a risk of frost, I'll actually bring my whole sprouting rack indoors, and it then lives in my kitchen, and as long as the temperature is above 55 degrees Fahrenheit, it will grow. As long as there is enough light to see by, it will grow. So the next thing you need to do, after you've watered your grass here, you've watered your wheatgrass seed, you then just take a standard tray and you plonk it on top so that the tray is in contact with the sprouts. Okay? Now the reason you do that is because for the first 3 days we want to keep light out. So that will just sit there, and what you do every day is you take the lid off, water once a day, put it back on again. On the morning of day 4 after planting it, take the tray off and leave it off. Okay, now the reason we do that is because this will have started to grow, and you'll see little white sprouts which are about this big, and they're usually by then starting to actually push the tray upwards. So that's the time that it then needs daylight Not direct sun, these. They like 70% shade. So if you try to grow wheatgrass in direct sun, it gets a bit cross with you. What you'll want to do is, as soon as that little sprout starts to come up and it's about this long and it's white, you then just take the tray off, continue to water it every day, and then when you'll know it's ready to harvest, because right down at the bottom of the tray, and this might be a little bit more difficult to demonstrate, but you'll notice if we pull some of these grassy bits here, that the seed at the bottom, or the grass leaf at the bottom, has actually started to split. We don't go by how tall it is before we harvest it, because that depends on the growing temperature, the time of year, the amount of daylight, etc. What we go by is when the blade at the bottom has started to split. When it's started to split, you're ready to go. So that's the time that you can either then harvest all of your wheatgrass, so either you just take the whole tray and cut the whole lot. It will store in the fridge for a week. So if you get it into one of those bags that keeps produce fresh for longer, you can store it in the bottom of the fridge. Or alternatively, if you've got a nice big fridge, like some people do, you can put the whole tray into the fridge. So if you've got a decent amount of space at the bottom of the fridge, then you're having it really, really, really living food, because what's happening, of course, is that all of the nutrients are preserved. If you cut it, it will last a week in the fridge, but the nutritional value will gradually start to drop. So if you want the freshest possible wheatgrass, the best thing to do is to keep it in the bottom of the fridge and only harvest it when you need it. And for the average shot of wheatgrass, which would be a normal sort of shot glass, which is 2 fluid ounces, a quarter of a tray per time will give you that 2 fluid ounces. So a tray of this size, this will last you for 4 days. If you're having 1 shot of wheatgrass per day, 2 fluid ounce shot. So that's the wheatgrass. I think that's kind of probably covered it. And so if we just move on to the sunflowers, because they are slightly different. Everything I've said for the wheatgrass also applies to the peas. They're grown in exactly the same way. What is slightly different is the sunflower, because they are a little bit more tricky. They're not more tricky to grow, but if you don't do the thing that they really like, then you don't get quite such good quality sprouts. So the sunflowers, I'll just need to get those. Thank you. Again, shake them, just so they're not all stuck together. And then what we do is, just like with the wheatgrass, we stick it onto the tray. And the same again with these, about half a jar full of the dry seed will give you 1 tray. And then just spread it out very gently, because you don't ideally want to break off any of these little tails. Okay, so that's our sunflowers. You sometimes get a couple of little extra bits, more than you bargain for in these sprouts. So again, with my invisible watering can, I would then water that heavily, allow it to drip, and then that's ready to go. But what you do differently about this is, rather than just having a tray like this, what you need for the sunflowers, they like weight. They like light exclusion, which is why you put a tray on it, but they like weight as well. And what you will do is, the reason for this, the reason it's different, is because if you don't weight it, it seems to not be able to work out which way is down. And so you'll get all of the sunflowers coming up at different times. And what you don't want is, when you've got a whole tray that you'd ideally like to harvest all at the same time, what you don't want is some that are ready, some that aren't ready. And the reason I think most people get frustrated with sunflowers, or fail with sunflowers, is that they aren't aware that the tray needs to be weighted so that they all know which way to grow, the roots grow down, and the shoots all come up at the same time. Now this is a really strong plant, so it doesn't matter if you put heavy weights on it. So you could either use a weighted tray, so stick some stones in this from the garden and then just stick it on top, just like before. Or alternatively, what you can do is, if you're short of space, you can just let the wheatgrass do the work. You can do that, and you can stick your wheatgrass on top. So if a lot of people say to me, I'd love to do this sprouting, but I'm actually really short of kitchen space. What I would say to them is, have you got room for that? If you've got room for that, you can grow wheatgrass and sunflowers. And they don't need to be right next to a window. Just as long as you've got enough light to see by, they will grow. Okay, so assuming we've got a decent sized kitchen, then we're going to just do them side by side. But it really doesn't matter. Now what I do, I've grown quite a lot of it on my rack at home. So I would just, if I've got a lot of stuff on the rack, I'll just do that. And I'll just grow them. Now, how long do we keep it covered? We keep it covered for longer than the wheatgrass. So wheatgrass, as we've just said, on morning of day 4, we take this off and we let it continue to grow in the light. With the sunflowers, you actually wait, it's usually about 6 days, you actually wait until these amazingly strong shoots start to push the tray off. And they will do that, even though it's a tray with weights on or a tray that's got wheatgrass on top. If you just wait long enough, what will happen is that it will start to force the tray off. As soon as you've got little ones appearing at the sides and the tray is starting to lift, take a look at it. You'll probably see lots of little, again white because it hasn't had light exposure, lots of little white seeds starting to come up. That is the time, if they all look about the same height, that's the time that you take the weights off. Now, how often do you water sunflowers? Less frequently than you do with the wheatgrass, in my experience. Now, at Hippocrates, they water it all the same. In England, I found it doesn't work because they're in a hot climate in Florida, they've got aircon, they've got the ventilator fans going the whole time. But in this country, what I've found over the years with mouldy sprouts, which are never very nice, is that it's best to water the sunflowers every 2 to 3 days. If it's particularly hot, then you can do them daily, but just be a bit more sparing. Or the other thing you can do is, you know those little plant sprays that you can get, just mist with a plant spray. But I wouldn't water them heavily every day, because in my experience, particularly when they're weighted, they tend to go mouldy. And we don't want mouldy sprouts, because then that's all very disappointing and we don't get the goodness from them because we have to throw them away. So, that's pretty much everything on category 1 sprouts. So again, how do we know when the sunflowers are ready? I think I mentioned it just now. We wait until either we've got that little split at the top and you can just start to see the little sprout come between the 2 major leaves, or you wait until nearly all of the little black holes have been shed. Okay. So the category 2s, so we mentioned that they've got some chlorophyll, and these are your superfood vitamin mineral sprouts that are very easy to grow. They're usually grown in the jar. So back to the jar, we've got them here. And with these, the mistake everybody makes is that they like to fill the jar a third to a half full of the small seed. That's a big mistake. All you do with these, because they expand so massively, all you do with these guys is that you just literally cover the bottom of the jar. And you might think, well, that's not going to feed me, that's not going to give me anything. But if you try to fill it more, especially if you take it to a quarter, a third, a half a jar, nothing's going to grow because there is no air ventilation, okay? So what you would do, we've got some alfalfa seed here. This is a classic category 2 sprout, and it was actually, alfalfa has been described as the poor man's multivitamin. It's so full of nutritional value. But all you do, literally, is about a tablespoon of these in the bottom of a sprouting jar this size. So that's a really, really important distinction between category 1 and category 2 if you're using the jar method. So don't fall into the trap of getting mouldy sprouts. So a little bit on the bottom. Just like with the wheatgrass and the sunflowers, you soak them just overnight, 8 to 12 hours. And then, again, exactly as before, you would pour the soap water off, rinse several times, again pour it off, you would rinse them twice a day, and again draining at the 45-degree angle. Now, these have taken approximately 6 days to grow from start. And as soon as you've got 2 little leaves, just like with the sunflowers, only smaller, as soon as you've got the 2 little leaves, they're ready to eat. But do make sure you rinse them twice a day, because otherwise they're going to go mouldy. And nobody wants mouldy sprouts, they stink and you have to throw them away. If there is insufficient ventilation, if you haven't got enough airflow, you might need to open a window next to where your sprouts are growing. I've never had the problem in my particular place where I live. I've never had a problem with them outside. But if your air quality isn't necessarily very good, or if you have a sort of hermetically sealed modern house that doesn't really have any airflow, you might need to put a fan on just to get air circulation. And the other reason that sprouts can go mouldy is if they're a bit too warm. So just check on your room temperature where you're growing them. If you're getting mouldy sprouts, then there's one of a few potential problems. Firstly, you've overwatered them. Secondly, there's not enough ventilation. Thirdly, it's too hot. Fourthly, you could have bad seed. It does happen. And it's been known that certain batches of seed have been completely rubbish and people can't grow anything from them. So if you have looked into all the other possibilities and you've got good ventilation and you haven't overcrammed your jar and you're still getting mouldy sprouts, then it's time, I think, to go back to the person that sold you the seed and said, I think that batch is mouldy, and get a different batch. Or just try growing something else, just in case it's different. So just a word on the seed itself and seed quality. If the seed has, and this is a question I was asked quite recently in fact, if the seed has been contaminated, and I understand that a doctor was telling a pregnant lady that she shouldn't be eating sprouts like this because they could be a source of listeria. Now, listeria is responsible for gut upsets and various other things. You can actually get quite unwell from listeria. And if you get listeriosis, you can get it it's mostly from food that hasn't been handled very well. And it's mostly from meat products and ready-made sandwiches and that sort of thing, rather than anything that you get from the sprouting world. But if you're getting contamination, or if your sprouts are making you unwell, the trick there is food-grade hydrogen peroxide. And that is wonderful stuff to rinse your sprouts in, and then you just rinse them again to wash off the food-grade hydrogen peroxide. But it zaps any bugs, so it's a really good way of just making sure you've got nice, good quality seed, and that's not going to be contaminated and not going to make you ill. So, category 2s, we are also thinking about the possibility of growing them in other media. So this one here, I'm just going to move these two. This is an automatic sprouter, and it's been a godsend for me, to be quite honest. I'm just going to put those down there. So I just want to run through the automatic sprouter very, very briefly. There's several types of these machines, but this one, it's electric as you see. It's got a timer on it as well, so you can time as to when the sprouts are sprayed. Sprouts grow well when they've got the right temperature, the right amount of oxygenation, and they also have the correct amount of water. So what this does is they don't sit in water because you've got a little drainage thing here, so you put that down the sink. And you've got a water reservoir that you can see here. You just fill this up, probably a couple of times a week is enough to fill it up. And every so often, according to how you set the timer, the pump will come on and it will mist your sprouts with water for 15 minutes, and then it will turn itself off again. And this is absolutely brilliant for the category 2 sprouts, and we have a variety here. We've got alfalfa, and we have sango radish, which is excellent for circulation. And we've also got, at the end, we've got some broccoli sprout. No, that's alfalfa, sorry, I've got them the wrong way around. Alfalfa we've spoken about. Let me show you the broccoli sprout, I think it's next door. No, it is this one. There's not much difference actually. Broccoli sprout tends to be darker. Broccoli sprouts are fantastic for hormone-related cancers. Really, really important if you have breast cancer or know somebody that has breast cancer or prostate cancer, then this is fantastic because it contains a phytonutrient called sulforaphane, which blocks bad estrogen, and bad estrogen is one of the contributing factors to hormone-related cancers. So that's just a little aside. I'm not saying that just by eating broccoli sprouts you can prevent every ailment under the sun, but you can certainly do yourself a lot of nutritional favours by increasing your sprout consumption when you have certain medical challenges. So, the automatic sprouters, vary in price. You can get one that's more upright. This, as you can probably work out, takes up quite a lot of kitchen space. If you're limited on your kitchen space, you have the option to get a smaller circular one, but with that one you have to change the water reservoir every day. Otherwise the sprouts start to stink and you'll end up with a horrible kind of mouldy mush. So it depends how labour intensive you want it to be. I love this because it just sits there and does its own thing, produces perfect sprouts every time, and all I have to do is remember to fill it up once every 2 to 3 days. So, but if you're more limited on space and you don't mind changing the water reservoir, all you need to do is just change the water reservoir in a smaller circular sprouter, which is cheaper to buy, and job done. Okay, so those are the automatic sprouters, perfect for category 2s, but you can also grow category 1s in them. So category 3, let's move on to those, the grain sprouts, grown in a very similar way in the jar. You can also grow them in here. But in the jar, you would fill, again, about a third full with buckwheat or the small grains. Anything smaller than this, if you're growing the really little ones like quinoa, that you soak for less time. The smaller the grain, the shorter the time you soak it for, because you don't want it going mouldy. So quinoa is kind of a bit of an exception. Buckwheat I would soak overnight, but quinoa is a good one to soak for just 6 hours. And then when you sprout it, what you would do is you would soak the seed, rinse it all off thoroughly, and then just turn like this. I know this is wheat, but you'd do that, and then what would happen is you would get all the little grains sticking to the side of the sprouting jar, and they grow better that way. The really little grain sprouts grow incredibly well if they're just stuck to the side of the sprouting jar, which is why you don't fill it half full. You fill it about a quarter to a third full with things. Going back to buckwheat just for a second, for all people that want to have sustained energy and a decent amount of calories in their food, buckwheat is quite a gloopy sprout. So for the first 4 hours, if you've got plenty of time on your hands, which I have to say I don't, if you have plenty of time on your hands, it's good to grow buckwheat in a sieve. So what you do is you put your sieve down, you put your sieve down, and you would have it in a larger container. So you'd have a sieve, larger container, and the buckwheat would just be in the sieve, in say a saucepan for example, soaking wet, and then you just rinse it every hour for the first 4 hours. That will stop it from being all gloopy, and if you soak it overnight, and you then just have to rinse it a lot of times. Whereas if you do it in a saucepan with complete immersion of the soak, and have the sprouts actually inside a sieve, and then just lift them out every hour for the first 4 hours, give them a good rinse, change the water, stick them back again, it's far easier to get rid of all the gloop. Otherwise you have to stand there for about 10 minutes rinsing off all the gloopy stuff. It's just a little tip that you kind of pick up as you go along. So the grain sprouts, you can eat sprouted wheat, but I wouldn't try to eat sprouted spelt. It would be a different grain. The sprouted spelt is fantastic for growing wheatgrass, but if you wanted a sprouted grain to make, for example, raw bread with, which a lot of people do, then the type of sprout you would want for that would be just the little, much smaller grain wheat. It's still called a wheat berry, but it's much smaller. And then when it's a softer shell as well. You don't want to be eating this stuff, it doesn't get spiky and not very nice. But then what you would do is you would again soak it in exactly the same way. You would sprout it in exactly the same way as the wheat grain, and it's a much softer seed. And when its tail is as long as it's ready to eat. And that is the key really with all of these sprouts in category 3, 4 and 5 and 6, is that as soon as the tail of the sprout is the same length as the seed it originally came from, it's ready to go. And you can use it in whatever way you want. So that's the small grains. Just remember, the smaller the grain, the less time it soaks for. And just stick it to the outside of the jar just by twisting it around a few times. Category 4, the pulses. These guys, again, a little bit like the peas in some ways. They're big, aren't they? So, what do? We fill the jar only 1/3 full of chickpeas. if we're sprouting these, because they take on a lot of water. They're really going to absorb all that water. So then after that, you would soak them though for 24 hours, because again, not only they're big sprout, they take a lot of time to absorb all that water. So 1/3 full, make sure that you soak them at least, 24 hours I would do. And then again, thorough rinsing, just like you did with the other sprouts, jar method, just on the countertop, 45-degree angle, rinse twice a day. With chickpeas, it depends what you want to do with them. If you want to make hummus out of them, I found that the hummus tastes better if the sprout is actually shorter than the original seed. So with these, I would actually grow them for a relatively short period of time. What you don't want is bitter sprouts with very long tails, because the longer the tail, the more bitter they're likely to be. And nobody particularly likes bitter hummus very much, so I wouldn't recommend that. The pulses, they're exactly the same. So for example, lentil sprouts are a little bit smaller, aren't they? Lentil seed is a little bit smaller, so you would just soak that overnight rather than the chickpeas, which are bigger. I would still only go about 1/3 with the lentils though, because they do take on quite a lot of water, and if you have too many crammed in, then they can grow at different times. So you might get some that aren't quite ready and others that are over ready because their tails have got too long. So just bear that in mind. More is not always better when you're sprouting. And also then you think, oh, how am I going to get through all this lot? And you end up not managing to eat it all. So the category 5, the mung and the doohy, we've seen those earlier. Exactly the same as everything else we've discussed. Called 1/3 to 1/2 a jar full. Soak overnight. Rinse, leave to drain. And again, when there's a little sprout on the end, or when the seed is about, the tail is about the same length as the seed, what you would do is you would then, they'd be ready to eat. These will store in the fridge for about 4 or 5 days. So you can store them in a jar, but what I prefer to do is transfer them into a BPA-free plastic container and pop them in the fridge. And these are an absolute staple in salads. They're fantastic in salads. You can also grow these guys. You've probably seen in Chinese restaurants that you get the long shoots that are white. They're grown exactly from the same seed, but the difference is that they're grown in the dark under pressure and warm. So with those, if you want to do the classic Chinese bean sprouts, you would soak and sprout in the same way. You'd then wash them, because you want to get the little green endy bits off, the little husk, you want to get that off. And then what you do is you would put a bowl in the bottom of your airing cupboard, and you would put the seed in that, and you would then pop some kind of weight or colander onto that. And you'd rinse them every day, and within about 5 days you'd have the sort of slightly anemic looking long bean shoots. That's the main difference between just normal sprouted mums and the bean shoots, the bean sprouts that you will see in Chinese places, or you can even get them in bags, can't you, in certain supermarkets. That's the difference. They're the same product, but it's just grown in a slightly different way. If you want anything that's white, it's usually been grown in the dark. So, finally, fenugreek. Now, fenugreek you can grow in 2 ways, and I found this out by accident. At Hippocrates, they teach with the fenugreek that you do it in exactly the same way. You soak it for 8 hours, rinse it twice a day, sprout it, and it's ready when the tail is the same length as the original plant, the original seed. I kind of had a bit of an accident with the automatic sprouter, and it was a happy accident. I think they call that serendipity, don't they? So what happened was, I put these in because I'm a busy kid and I was actually having a bit of a lazy day. I decided that I would throw these in there because I couldn't be bothered to be rinsing them in the jar method. So I stuck them in the auto sprouter, and the first thing that happened was that I forgot to eat them. Then they started growing and growing and growing, and I'm thinking, well, at some point I'm going to have to throw these away because obviously they've gone far past where they should be for eating. Then I discovered that they actually grew in a similar way to alfalfa and broccoli sprouts, and they ended up with the little chlorophyll-rich leaf on top. And I thought, right, okay, personal experimentation, here we go. Cut it, and tried eating it. And it was fantastic. And it was just like a radish sprout because it's spicy. So whilst you might read in books that the only way to grow fenugreek is the jar method, rinse twice a day after an 8 to 12 hour soak overnight, and then eat it when its little tail is as long as itself, you can actually, if you have one of these machines, grow it right the way through to sort of decent size until it's actually got greens on it. Then you can chop them up and use them in salads, and they're not quite as pungent, and it's a good way of getting chlorophyll and extra nutrients as well. So just a little bit of an accident led to that discovery. I don't know if anybody else has discovered it, but maybe I should blog about that one. So that's the auto-sprouter. Those are our 6 categories of sprouts. Fundamentally, if you're going to start growing sprouts, you either need a jar, and it's best for home use, to be honest, a jar. But if you're travelling, then this is brilliant because it weighs about the same as, I don't know, skimpy bikini, lightweight underwear. It doesn't take up any space. You just stick it in your pocket as you go through customs or whatever. And you can take your dry seed, and I do this when I'm travelling all the time. I take mung beans, and I take some of the alfalfa, for example. And all you would do is you'd find, if you have, if you've got a hotel room, it's not a problem because you can do this in the sink. So no excuses, guys. So if you just put your seed in here, again thinking about how much to use, you'd put in about 1/4 of a bagful. You would then stick it in your hotel sink, or you'd find a saucepan in the apartment that you're staying in, and you'd run it under the tap, and you'd sit them to soak in the saucepan. This is what I do when I'm travelling. If I'm not in a hotel, if I'm taking an apartment and it's got a kitchen, then it's fantastic. In hotels, it's slightly more challenging, but it's still doable, so bear with me. What you'd want to do then is exactly the same. You just soak it overnight. Next day, rinse, 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 and then you need somewhere to drain it. So if you've taken an apartment somewhere, then all you would do is just hang it on the kitchen cupboard with something underneath to catch the drips. If you're in a hotel, you can hang it on the shower. You can hang it on some hotels. They've got this pull-across washing line, haven't they, that you can dry your washing on. You can hang it on that. Many a funny look I've had as I've come out of hotel rooms with the cleaners going in and sort of looking at me as, oh, that's the one that's got all that weird stuff hanging up. But you can do this. So anybody that travels frequently, that still wants to be able to have their healthy food and to gain access to their sprouts, even if, whatever else they're eating, you can still sprout if you're travelling. And it's just, a matter of getting into the right mindset and getting confident with the availability of what's out there. But sprouting bags are brilliant if you're travelling. And I think there's only been one trip that I've done recently where I couldn't take a sprouting bag with me, and that was when I was climbing a mountain. So you can pretty much grow stuff any way you like. And if you don't have a kitchen cupboard to hang it on, then I don't know, with a coat hanger out of the wardrobe or something, and find a window to stick it on. Anywhere will do, and just experiment. But it really is worth doing, and you can find these things very cheaply on the internet. So that is, in a nutshell, sprouting, how to do it, our 6 categories of sprouts. We haven't gone into a vast amount of detail about the individual benefits of every single sprout category that there is, but that's available in other stuff that I do, and we'll be covering that during the weekend as well. So if you wanted to know, for example, what's the best sort of sprout to eat for your circulation, then we can cover that. Radish, anything that's hot and spicy is going to be good for circulation. So I think now, because it's probably almost time for break, let's go to question and answers. So hopefully that's covered everything for you, but I'm very happy to take questions, yes.
Greenhouse, would you be able to grow sprouts in a greenhouse?
You definitely could in the winter. I think in the summer it would be too hot. What you would have to do...
That's what I meant in the cooler.
Yes, you'd actually have to cover the top of the greenhouse because they don't like fully direct sun. They like about 70% shade.
Right.
And so at Hippocrates, obviously, because they're growing sprouts for large numbers of guests, they have 100 odd guests there every day, and they're all having Greek breakfast and sunflower sprouts and everything. What they do is they actually have the complete top of the greenhouse covered with hessian sheets and keeping the direct sun out. And of course in Florida it's very hot. And so they have an air conditioning system that keeps the greenhouse cool. So if it all gets too much, it'll get sucked just by the greenhouse. What I think in the UK, if you've got a particularly hot day, then no, they're going to wilt. I tried actually sticking the automatic sprouter in my conservatory, and it was a complete disaster because it was far too hot in there one summer, and everything just went horribly mouldy. So if you've got too much heat, it's going to mould. What I would say though is that in the winter it's certainly doable, provided the greenhouse is warm enough. If it isn't warm enough, then you need to bring it inside. And there's quite a lot of, I mean, in many garden centres or some of the online gardening catalogues, for example, you can get these sprouting racks, and they don't take up a lot of space. You can actually make them, if you're on a real tight budget, you can make them out of old bits of plumbing. You can just kind of stick them all together, and as long as you've got a strut across, a strut across, a strut up in almost like a shelf system, then all of the water can fall through in between, as long as the struts are of the appropriate width for a tray to sit here and here. So that would be a really good thing to do. Mine's actually made out of old bits of plumbing. I didn't buy a specific one. What you wouldn't want is you wouldn't want a tray, a sort of a solid base for your sprouting rack, because it doesn't allow things to drain, and you want the air to circulate. So the best type is really something that's just got a few bars. Next best thing is if it's actually got trays, or well, not trays, but sheets, stepped sheets like this, but the sheets themselves, or whatever they are, the rests of the trays have got holes in, because you want air to circulate, you want stuff to be able to drain. Other questions? Yes.
I've actually got some buckwheat that won't sprout very satisfactorily.
So you've got some
buckwheat.
Buckwheat.
It doesn't seem to sprout very satisfactorily.
Right.
So, do I need to throw it away, or can I just leave it a day or two and make some buckwheaties, or eat it anyway? Or,
could be a bad batch.
I mean, it hasn't gone mouldy, so
It hasn't
but it's
moulded.
not sprouting very well.
Okay, what type of buckwheat is it? Is it hulled or unhulled?
Hold.
Hulled.
Yes.
Okay, so it's just like this.
Like that, yes.
Yeah. Is it organic?
Yes.
It is organic. Okay. That's the reason I asked that question, is because if it's not organic, it might have been irradiated. Irradiated seed will not grow no matter what you do to it.
Well, it said it's organic.
It says organic. Okay. It might be that it's simply a bad batch. It may be that you're not rinsing it thoroughly enough. But
Well,
usually
yeah,
with
I think
buckwheat,
I am, because I've had other buckwheat and
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
I might in that case blame the batch.
Mm.
Sometimes it's not what you're doing to it, it's what is the problem with itself in the first place. So it might be that the batch is bad.
So would you throw it away, or?
Is it edible?
Well, it seems to be, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not actually going mouldy.
Okay.
So I needed to actually make some buckwheat
So it's not-
out of some of it. Just
That's
left it a day or
good
two.
idea,
and-
so it doesn't go to waste.
Yeah.
Yes, but keep rinsing and draining.
Mm.
And so no mould, so you didn't get that horrible smell that buckwheat does.
I think when I did one batch, because it wasn't sprouting, I left it and left it. It did go mouldy.
Yes.
But I thought if I just leave it a day or two,
Yeah.
then I thought it might be alright.
It might be the seed itself, possibly. It might be, because it sounds like you're doing everything else right. So if you've rinsed it enough, then it's quite possibly the seed. So make some buckwheaties out of that batch, and then try a different batch of seed and see if that works any better.
Okay.
Max, what do you tell us about wheatgrass?
Mm.
You grow it indoors, I'm toying with the idea of growing it outdoors. Is
Yes.
that possible?
Grows very well outside.
And
Yeah.
we're
Grows very
finding
well
that we get
outside.
little black flies turning up from time to time. What do you reckon that is?
That's quite possibly one of two reasons. Firstly, it could be that there's not enough ventilation, so they're being attracted by a smell. Secondly, if you have a look on the seed itself, if there's any mould at all, then it could be that the fly's being attracted by that. It might be that it's too hot for it, because it doesn't like direct sun. So as long as the outside temperature is above 55 degrees Fahrenheit, wheatgrass will grow. If it's colder than that, you'll have to bring it in. If the average temperature, I know obviously our temperature fluctuates during the day and night, and it gets down quite cold at night, but as long as the daytime temperature is warm enough, then it will grow outside. Seasonally, I tend to start growing mine outside in about April, and I stop mid-October, because by then I've usually found that there's not enough warmth for it to grow well. The sunflowers are a bit more sensitive, because they're more of a kind of Mediterranean area plant. So I find that they don't like the temperature is going too low. So it's a bit more of a sensitive seed. So the best thing to do with that is to bring it indoors when the outside temperature. I normally from about beginning of October, end of September, beginning of October, I bring the sunflowers indoors. But if you've got a lot of flies, it's possibly that there's just not enough ventilation around them and they're being attracted by mould that you may not be able to see, but possibly they can detect.
Max, the sunflower seeds you have there are black.
Yes.
I have some which have stripes on them. Are they different?
They're a slightly different species of sunflower,
Okay.
but they will still grow and they're still worthwhile doing. The best quality ones are from the black ones. But I'm glad you've mentioned that because there are certain sunflower hulls that are stripy, and the stripy hulls are fine as long as they've got hulls on them.
Yes.
It's these guys
Yes.
that won't grow.
Yes.
They're not going to grow.
I had them
These-
delivered from Aikenberry with the
Sorry,
stripes on. I had them delivered from Aikenberry with
Yes.
the stripes on.
They'll be fine.
They'll be fine.
They'll be
Okay,
fine.
thank you.
Yes, some people say there's not quite nutritional value in the stripy ones as there is in the others. But to be honest, I'm all about adding.
Yeah.
So let's add the good stuff. There's still good stuff to be had by the stripy sunflowers.
And the wheatberry
Yeah.
is a triangle shaped seed. Is that correct?
Buckwheat.
Buckwheat, sorry.
Buckwheat is
yes.
sort of like a pyramidal shape. Yes.
And that's quite hard, isn't it? So it's just the same soaking as it would be as you were talking about overnight.
You can get two types of buckwheat just as you can get two types of sunflower. If it's got a really hard shell on it,
Yes.
then, and if it's a darker colour, if it's
Yes.
a darker brown,
Yes.
then that is unhulled buckwheat, and you would have to grow that in the same way as you would grow the wheatgrass, into something called buckwheat lettuce, which is very nice. You can eat that in salads.
Okay, thank you.
If it's a paler colour and doesn't have a shell on it and isn't so hard, that's this one.
Okay.
That's grown in a different way because that's in the jar, and then you let it get until the tail is the
Yes.
same length as the seed.
Thank you.
But yes, good point.
Thank you.
So it's just the same as with the sunflowers. These will grow a little tail, and then you can eat them, and they're a good source of protein
Right.
and essential fats. These are the ones that grow in soil. So the same difference applies
Yeah.
to the buckwheat as to the
It was
sunflowers.
just a variation on the colouring. I was more,
Yes.
asking.
Yeah, the other thing to watch out for, and is again another important point, is that whilst you've got a difference, the hulled buckwheat is pale, the unhulled is darker. Also, if somebody has put roasted buckwheat into a bag, it will be darker. So make sure you know what you're getting. And if it's roasted, then obviously that's not going to grow. It's not going to do anything.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
I've got two questions. Can I go back to the rooting that you
Yes.
said is in the wheatgrass?
Yeah.
Because I always understood it's very much there in the buckwheat lettuce, isn't it?
Yes,
So
it
that
is.
goes quite pink, doesn't it, as it grows?
A
that
little bit.
stem,
Yes, it does.
Which I
Yes.
always thought was the pinkness that was the rooting. Is it
It's-
just this isn't as rich, or is it as good, or
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure that I've got a full answer to that. Rooting is present in the bottom
Lower
part
section.
here, in the lower
Right.
section.
Right.
It doesn't really matter, as far as I'm aware, whether it's white or pink.
Okay.
The pink is more likely to be other phytonutrients, in other words, other plant chemicals, other antioxidants. So rooting, I was under the impression that rooting, the white part, was indicative of a good level of rooting.
Right.
I'm not sure about pink, to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
But
No,
yes, it's all in there.
Yeah, I didn't realise it was in wheatgrass as well.
Yes, yes, definitely.
And then my second question is, if we're juicing sprouts,
Mm.
have you found anywhere where you can get jars with appropriate lids to be able to do more in one jar? Because I find these jars so limiting.
They're small.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you can do it in a good old bag because you can get decent sized bags.
Yeah.
These are the biggest jars that I've been able to find on the internet.
Yeah.
The other option that you could do is you could go to your friendly old traditional sweet seller. Because you know those traditional sweet shops
With the big
where they've got
jars,
those
yes.
great big jars
Yeah.
of things. You could say, you know what, if you ever get rid of any of those jars, can I please have them? Because they've got screw lids. You could then just make a load of holes in the top, or alternatively, what would be better would be to cover it with a piece of muslin and put an elastic band around.
And you think muslin would have
And
enough air
it would.
circulation? That would be alright.
It would
yeah.
be fine,
Oh, okay.
yes, so that's another option. So yeah, I totally understand, because I get a bit frustrated sometimes with, if I'm growing a lot of wheatgrass, then I have to use a lot of jars, and then that takes up a lot of space, and really it would be great to be able to have a massive great jar. And they do exist, but you have to just get a little bit more creative as to where you find them.
Right.
But yeah, then that would be the traditional sweet jar, or any great big Kilner jar that you can find. Take the normal lid off, elastic band, muslin, you're ready to go.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And that's how we do it. We're breaking at 3:30. Some people have treatment at 3:30. 4 o'clock, we've got 4 o'clock treatment. So I'm happy to take questions until we run out of questions.
These guys just glass jars.
Glass jars are better. You can get plastic jars. If you're getting plastic jars, you want to make sure that they're BPA free. BPA is bisphenol A. It's a nasty chemical that leaches out of plastics and has been implicated in certain cancers. So you don't really want your food to be taking on BPA. So ideally what you want is to make sure that it's a glass jar. Try not to drop them too much, because they don't tend to last. And yes, it's better. I prefer glass because it's more inert. If plastic's the only option, then as long as it's BPA free, you'll be fine. But the plastic jars, I've only ever seen them this size and smaller. So you can't grow a lot of sprouts. You then just need a load of jars all along the windowsill, and that might be a bit.
And you can get the standards for the jars, can't you, online? Just
You
to
can.
stand a normal
Yes,
jar,
absolutely.
any jar.
You can get
just buy
jars
them.
like this.
Yeah.
In fact, the Fresh Network. There's a link from my website. You can go to fresh-network.com. They sell a kit, and what it would include would be 3 sprouting jars this size, plus a rack to drain them.
That's what I mean, just the racks,
Yes.
not jars,
Or,
just the
yeah,
racks.
I broke my rack. I dropped it on my ceramic floor because I'm clumsy.
Yeah.
And what I just do now with all my sprouting jars, no matter what size they are, is I just stick them on the draining board on the drainer thing. Yeah. Works really well.
You can get the metal drainers, they would be good.
Yes,
wouldn't they?
you can
Stand
get
them
those.
on. You
Yes,
can get the
exactly.
jars.
Yeah. What you don't want is you don't want it on a wooden drainer.
No,
Mine's
because it's mouldy.
stainless steel. So stainless steel is good because ideally it doesn't want it. It's going to take a lot of moisture. It doesn't rust, and you just want something that's not going to get stained and go grotty really. And you need the good ventilation. So if you're trying to drain it on a wooden board or even a plastic board that hasn't got enough, you've got 2 wide plastic strut things, then if you've got that up against plastic, you're not going to get the ventilation. And this is what you need to prevent the mould when you're sprouting things. So after you've rinsed, you just want that 45-degree angle. You want to allow the air to circulate, which is why this has a mesh.
Yeah.
And you just want to make sure that
muslin
it's...
is just as good. Muslin is just as good.
Muslin's fine, yes, it will do the job, and it's how I used to grow things before sprouting jars were commonly found. Yeah, I just used to use a good old piece of elastic band and sheet of muslin, and off you go. And you could get bigger jars, but I broke all mine. Frequently buy new sprouting jars because I keep dropping them.
Where would you buy your wheatgrass seeds?
My wheatgrass, my best, Akenbury Sprouts is my best resource for all of this stuff. They will sell you the trays of greens. So Akenbury is ACONBURY.
Is that in there?
Is that in there? It's not actually. No.
How do you
So
spell that?
ACONBURY. Akenbury. ACONBURY. Akenbury.
Seeds.
Sprouts. And they do all of the dry seed, so this is from Akenbury. This I got somewhere else. They do these ones, they're all organic. And the peas you can get from Akenbury, or you can get them in the supermarket. But Akenbury will also grow and deliver to your home trays of wheatgrass, sunflower greens and pea shoots. So all of the stuff that you're having in your juices this weekend rather, is from Aikenbury, because Judy and myself, between us, could not grow enough stuff to keep all you guys going for 3 days. So you've got a big delivery from Aikenbury. Now, just on cue, Judy, the Raw Kitchen Queen, has given me these. A piece of net curtain will also do the trick. So there you go. Take down your old net curtains, recycle, recycle, recycle. And this is an interesting device, which I have to say, I personally haven't seen these before. Judy, where did this come from?
I haven't got a clue though. I got them online.
Okay.
Shall I talk them through?
So yes, go ahead.
You can always edit this.
No, we'll have you in. You can be my honorary guest.
Okay, so this is very useful for travelling because they're lighter weight, and also somebody was wanting bigger ones. And then you get an inside one with holes in it. So you sort of, to fill it up with this much, I probably had about that many. This is lentils. I can pass them around for you to have a look. Quickest, easiest, take about 2 days and they're ready to eat. So you can drain them into that and sit them up like that while they drain, and then tip that out. And they come with a lid with holes in, because the sprouts are still growing. You don't want to put some in your car or even in your bag. You could, once you've drained it, put that in there, and then you're good to go while they're still growing.
Fabulous.
But you also come with one with holes in, which you could use. Yeah, and the last time when I got these, I think if you're clever, you probably get them for 15 quid, otherwise they'd be 20. But and I've had mine 6 years, and you just get a little bit more room than those small ones.
And they're great because if you drop them on your ceramic floor, they bounce
They
rather than
bounce,
shatter.
yes. And the other thing is, because the holes are, I never bother with this, because I usually do the smaller ones in the glass jars, with a tick on the side for draining them. Yeah. To put them on the draining board like that. They come with another little plastic insert that goes inside the bottom there, so that the little baby alfalfas and teeny sprouts won't go through. So it's good kit, this. And as I say, the plastic, I'm sure it's BPA free. It's because it's cold, it's not as crucial as if it was hot. It's not such a big, quick chemical reaction if it's cold, but I assume they are, because they're made for the raw food people who are fussy about that. So there's those 2 other ways. These, by the way, one curtain in in Oxfam or wherever you like will be enough for you and all your friends. I get the nylon ones because they don't rot, and then you just bung them in the washing machine, cut them up, and give them to everybody with a rubber band.
Pretty as well.
Yes.
Yes, come very country kitchens.
Yes.
So, keep firing away with the questions. If you have any.
So, say for one person for
Yes.
a week, and thinking about the nutritional value of sprouts and using sprouts as a main nutrition source, what would you suggest as a balance of different sprouts?
Oh, good question. Well, obviously I'm going to say you need to be juicing, ideally. So you would have, if you're juicing every day for a week, 7 days in a week, one of these, 4 days. So you'll need 2 of these, 2 of those, 2 of those, if you're really going for it. If you're kind of not going for it with quite so much oomph, then you could juice a bit less. So it varies depending on what else you're putting in your juice, but if you're going to be really religious about it and putting all of this in juice every single day, then ideally you want 1/4 of a tray per day of each. You could do less than that, you'd still get benefits. So you could get by on 1 tray of each per week, but you wouldn't have as much benefit. So I like to go, it's difficult to go by weeks because I tend to break it up, I tend to go days. So I would suggest that you could do that much. It would be about 1/6. So then you'd be just under a week, 5 to 6 days with all of this. So then you just replace the tray every 5 to 6 days. With these ones, it's probably easier for me to just show you what's in the automatic sprouter. You can see the size of the trays. If I fill this up with everything, it obviously all grows at the same time. That is too much for even me to get through in a week. And also it all develops at the same time. So you've then got this absolute glut of sprouts, and you just have them coming out of your ears, to be quite honest. So what I would suggest is that if you get an automatic sprouter, if you're just doing the jar method, this doesn't apply, but for those that would like to invest in an auto sprouter, the best thing to do is to start off with one of these with your seed in every 2 days, because then you've got them at different stages of growth and development, and you don't get a glut all in one go. One of these lasts me 3 days. So 3 5s are 15. That's a fortnight's worth for one person, but you wouldn't grow everything at the same time because they don't last that long. How to harvest these? What you can do is when they're ready, which these are now ready because you can see they've got the little sprout, the 2 leaves, and they've both, the leaves have just sprouted out nicely. Loads of rooting. You could either just cut them and rinse them, or alternatively, you could pick up the whole thing, roots and all, and leak everywhere, and you could get a very large container from your kitchen and fold it up so that you can actually get these into a large container, and then the whole thing can go in the fridge, and then you can just cut them out and use them. I don't eat all of this stuff. I just eat the top part.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because that's not growing in a substrate, is it?
No.
So
Just
when I do it in my jars,
Yeah.
I'm effectively all of that, don't I?
Yeah,
Because
you do.
I don't have that.
You don't
Pots and
have that.
pans.
No, but it's fine. Now, what I would suggest, it's a good point actually, because what I would suggest when you're growing it in the jar is that you rinse the sprouts very thoroughly to get rid of all the little black seeds.
Yeah.
So just stick it all in your kitchen sink and swill it all around, and then all the little black bits will fall off, and then just spin it to dry it. But going back to Chris's question about how much for one person for 1 week, I would say you'd be fine with starting something off. If you start on let's pick a day. So let's start on a Monday morning, because all work starts on Monday morning, doesn't it? Starting on a Monday morning, you would start soaking everything. You'd soak your seeds for the tray greens, and you'd start putting things in one of these, or if you haven't got one of these, you'd start putting your seed in here. On Thursday, I would say, with the jar method, you would start with another jar. So you're getting one of these every 3 days. Because I think you get through one of those in 3 days if you're getting a decent quantity of sprouts for nutrition. So 2 a week, but just stagger everything. So any farmer would probably tell you that you don't go out and plant absolutely everything all in one go. So we need to become farmers, in effect, because we're doing indoor gardening. And when you want things to give you a gradual, sort of a regular crop, then you don't plant everything all together, because obviously then you've got a complete glut and then you haven't got enough for the rest of the summer. So definitely with this stuff, start 2 jars off per week, maybe on a Monday, maybe on a Thursday, if you want to start on a weekend, and then midweek, so you could do a Saturday and a Wednesday, for example, whatever works best in your schedule. So I'd say 2 of these per week, and maybe 1/6. So you could go there, down the middle. Handful of the stuff would be fine, which would be about 1/6 of the tray. So one of those every 6 days. And the other ones, the sprouted, for example, if we did some sprouted sunflowers, but the grey sunflowers, what you could do with these are your proteins and good quality fats. I always recommend to soak seeds before you eat them, because then that gets rid of any enzyme inhibitors, which are important because that's then more beneficial for digestion. You can digest them more easily. What you would do is you would do the jar method again, soak these overnight, sprout them until they've got just a little end of it, then they're ready to eat. You can mix those in salads. So the kind of quantity of that you would need would probably be about 1 jar every 4 or 5 days. You wouldn't need a lot of that, because that's kind of the condiment almost. The real main nutrition from all of this, apart from those that need extra protein from their seeds, the real mainstay of the nutritional value of sprouts is category 1 and category 2. If you're focusing on those, the rest of it is a bit of fun, that your category 1s and category 2s are the ones with the main nutritional value. If you're then wanting your calories and your carbohydrates, that's some grains, that would be a buckwheat, and again that would probably 2 jars a week would be enough of that. And with the mums, I find that 2 jars a week satisfies my requirements. So 2 jars of this size of mums. Other people, bigger men for example, they would need 3 jars a week. 2 is fine for me, so small to medium sized female, 2 a week is enough. So this is where your calories are coming from. These are actually quite calorific, it's surprising. Likewise says the buckwheat, but it's good calories as opposed to dead calories, so there is a difference. And so yes, jar of those maybe a week, or 2 jars a week, 2 jars a week of these. And as much as you feel you can manage of the category 1 and category 2, because they're the powerhouses. Questions? You need some air.
Oh yeah.
Let's have some air. It's nice out there. Yes.
The water that you've soaked all your seeds in,
Yes.
and that goes down the drain.
It does go down the drain,
What
but
about-
alternatively you can
what
feed
if-
it to your plants.
Yes,
You can say
I can
that
suggest
you
that.
want to recycle your water. Yeah.
yeah.
I do.
Because
do
it must
that.
be rich in nutrients.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, so you can actually use it to feed your houseplants.
And what about even adding more water to that and spraying,
Sorry, adding more water to.
adding more water to that concentrated water and using that to spray?
Spray.
I don't know,
this.
just a
It's
thought.
not something that I've done. One thing we can do that I haven't actually mentioned, which some people like the idea of, is if you're trying to really, really maximise the nutritional value of your sprouts, it's not so important for these because they're only growing for about 10 days, but it has been said that if you use seaweed fertilisers, so for example you could use a liquid seaweed concentrate if you've got an auto-sprouter, so you could put a little bit of liquid fertiliser in there should you want to. They're not growing for very long, so how much extra benefit you might get is possibly a little debatable. One thing you can do for increasing the mineral content of your sprouts is you can put a pinch of mineral-rich sea salt in when you're soaking them. And according to Victoria Skolbinskas, one of the lecturers in Hippocrates, he actually says that it would encourage your sprouts to take up more minerals if you put a pinch of proper full-spectrum mineral sea salt in with the soap water. So I mean, literally you soak them in very, very dilute salty water overnight. You then get rid of that, and the sprouts should, in theory, be more nutritious. Likewise, if you're using the soil, some people like to mix kelp powder, which is a crushed seaweed, kelp powder with their soil so that the sprouts have the chance to take up more nutrient value. Something that I do when I give my sprouts the first water, and when I also give the automatic sprouter its first switch on, the first reservoir full, what I'll do is use something called ocean solution, which is diluted seawater. Okay, you might think, what on earth is the point of that? But all minerals ultimately end up in the sea. And ocean solution has been shown in a very interesting book called Sea Energy Agriculture, which is by Dr. Neil Murray. He wrote and did lots of experiments about the benefits of adding diluted ocean water and using it as a fertiliser. And he had lots of interesting pictures in this book because he'd have same soil, some watered with standard water, some watered with this diluted ocean solution stuff. And he measured the mineral content and the vitamin content, and he found that there were more minerals in the seawater watered produce than there were in the standard water produce, and they grew quicker and they grew bigger. So that's not a problem, evidently, because they just take the minerals out of the sea, and the mercury isn't in there because it's proper evaporated ocean solution. But he was actually using, it was back in the 50s he was doing this, he was actually using seawater. So maybe the plants were selectively absorbing, who knows. I don't know if he measured for mercury.
You mentioned his name, I missed his name.
Maynard Murray. M-A-Y-N-A-R-D. Murray. More questions? Oh, there is something called Ocean Solution, which you can buy, or Ocean Grown. And it is fundamentally the diluted seawater done for you in a big 5 litre, kind of like petrol can container thing. And I bought some of that about 7 years ago. I'm still using it. You only need a tiny quantity. So I bought my 5 litre thing, and it was about 80 quid, so it was quite expensive. But literally, I'm still using it, and I grow sprouts all the time, so it lasts forever. Maybe I'm not using enough, but it's an option, and there are quite a lot of studies. If you look up Ocean Solution on the internet, you'll find some quite interesting information and some quite interesting studies about how produce has a better mineral content if you use that than if you don't use that. Ultimately, there's a lot of nutrition in these little things anyway. So this really, if you're doing Ocean Solution, it would just be the kind of, as Judy was talking earlier, platinum level. It would be the absolute icing on the cake within the lottery ticket kind of thing. We don't necessarily need to go that far. The other thing you could do is you could grow it in, you could get rock dust, crush rocks and mix that in with your compost, because that will allow more minerals to be taken up. So there are a lot of things that you can do with the soil, but fundamentally, if you've got good quality seed in the first place, it should have a decent spectrum of nutrients in it. So it's just really the kind of tiny little bit extra that could make all the difference if you're suffering from some horrible disease. But for the average person upgrading their food choices, this is good enough.
Do you use distilled water to water?
I don't actually have a water distiller. I have a whole house water filtration system,
So
which
you
is
filter
carbon
water.
silver. So everything, all of my water in my house is filtered because I've actually got a water filter system on the in-pipe.
And if you had water
so-
distilled, is distilled water good enough for them?
Distilled water is fine for
Yeah.
them, but I actually personally use the filtered water
Yeah.
because plants don't have a problem with some of the stuff that we do. Judy mentioned earlier that it's the inorganic minerals that are in water that aren't necessarily terribly good for us. And if we have water that's, soft water, for example, that's high in calcium, has been shown to be more of a risk for heart disease because it triggers more atherosclerosis than the hard water area. So soft water to drink is not necessarily that good for you. I might have got the wrong mineral there, no, it's calcium, it's in hard water. But soft water, people that live in areas where they drink soft water actually have more heart disease than people that live elsewhere in hard water areas. Plants, as long as you don't feed them lots of, or wash them in lots of chlorine, they don't mind because they have the ability to take up inorganic minerals from the soil and convert them into their structure. We can't do that, but plants do. So anything you're watering with, it doesn't matter if there's residual minerals in it, because the plants will utilise those. So my whole house water filter system, every tap you turn on in my house, you get filtered water. So it doesn't matter which tap I get which tap I fill up the watering can with, it will be filtered water. So plants are less fussy. You can soak them in chlorinated water. When I go and stay in hotels, I'll use just the water that comes out of the tap because you haven't got much choice, because you need quite large volumes. The sprouts still grow fine. I do wash them in filtered water if I can, because I take a portable water filter away with me wherever I go. But the sort of quantity you need for soaking the water, it takes forever to generate that in a little water filter. So I just use what comes out of the tap, and they still grow just as well. They're very forgiving.
So I was reading about sunflowers, that they're using them to clean up the nucleus spills and things, and they actually can clean the soil of heavy metals, so
Yeah.
probably don't want to get them, water them and stuff.
You don't want to water them and stuff.
They're using them and they throw them away afterwards,
Yeah.
as nuclear waste.
Right.
It's quite interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. But yes, heavy metal problems are quite widespread. So yeah, they can be.
Clean your garden up with sunflowers.
Yes, excellent. How are we doing? We can keep going. I know that somebody has a massage at 4 o'clock and some treatments are coming up. But if anybody's got any kind of last few questions. Oh, we've got juice though, Judy, haven't we? Yes, juice is coming.
Do you do juices twice a day then? Normally?
I personally, the recommended, if we're really going for it with maximising health and putting absolutely all the really good stuff we can one with juice 3 times a day.
Right.
But we all have lives and jobs, don't we? So what I do is I make one enormous juice and I have it for breakfast. I don't juice later in the day because I'm out all day, I'm away from my house usually 12 hours a day, so I don't have the opportunity to juice twice a day. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll make up an even more enormous one than normal and stick it in the flask. You will lose some of the nutritional value if you keep it, but you don't lose that much, it's still worth doing.
So what's enormous to you? I mean, what's a regular juice you
Regular juice for me would be, if that were a glass, that much.
So a pint.
About a pint, yes. Yeah, and that's breakfast.
Okay.
So do you chew it slowly? The
Do I-
juice, do you
Do I swill it around in my
Do you
mouth to...
chew it?
I'll tell you what, if I had time I would. At weekends I do that. Not during the week because, you know, I'm not perfect. Yes, if we're doing everything absolutely perfectly, then I would definitely swill it around in my mouth and take time and probably meditate every morning as well. But I run 3 businesses and I'm just, you know, my life is fairly frantic. If I didn't juice, I wouldn't be able to run 3 businesses, so that's something that I find really helpful. The whole Living Foods thing allows me to do what I do. So yes, if one has sufficient time in one's day, then to maximise the benefit that you get out of the juice, you would swill it around in your mouth to mix it with your salivary amylase, which is the enzyme that breaks down starch, and then your system has even less work to deal with. But fundamentally, unless you're, you know, sort of on the critical list, it's fine just to get the stuff into your stomach, just get it down you.
And that would be your breakfast.
That's my breakfast.
And then you'd have protein like this.
Then I'd have, well, it depends what I'm doing. My day varies so much, but sometimes I'll have second breakfast. So at weekends I'll have second breakfast, which is usually either a giant smoothie or a load of chia porridge after I've come back from my long run. So that's weekends. Weekdays are different. Weekdays I'll sometimes just go through till lunchtime and then have a huge amount of salad and sprouted stuff. And then evenings vary again, it depends what I'm doing. So my life is quite varied, and so there's no such thing as a typical day for me, really. Typical kind of day, yes, but there's no sort of, I can't say that Monday to Friday I do this, because it doesn't work out like that. Yeah, sometimes I don't eat at all because I'm too busy. That's rare.
Okay.
But yeah, it does happen sometimes. Judy?
Do you want to show people what's left in a distiller?
Oh, yes, we could do, but have we got juice? Because I know that some people have got to go for massage.
I'll see whether that's
See
really
how
good.
juice
You
is
might
going.
want to talk about that or pass it around.
Yeah. I think pass it round.
Yeah.
Actually,
Just,
speak
see where they're up to with the juice.
That's from one go. This is one lot. I haven't done lots and lots of water, just 1 4-litre amount.
You smell it.
So yeah, I think we've covered sprouting anyway. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.